I am delighted to join AidEx and Development 2030 in their webinar series to raise awareness regarding the efforts made by host countries such as Colombia in welcoming migrants and refugees. The existing political, social, institutional, and economic crisis in Venezuela has generated one of the largest migrant crises in the entire world. As the Organization of American States has concluded, the speed and magnitude of the migrant flow coming from Venezuela is comparable to that coming from war-torn countries such as Syria, Southern Sudan, Afghanistan, or Somalia. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, 87% of Venezuelan households were living under the poverty line, and over 60% of them did so under extreme poverty conditions. These figures are particularly worrying, bearing in mind that Venezuela's poverty levels were below 50% in 1996. We need to see the rule of law in Venezuela. Remember that Venezuela used to be one of the richest countries in the world. They used to have a very high level of income in the 80s, 90s because of oil, yes, but now they are a very poor country with those very high levels of extreme poverty for more than 60% of their population. International organizations estimate that over 5 million Venezuelans have left the country since 2016, looking for a bright future or for themselves, their families, and their children, seeking freedom, access to justice, opportunities to have jobs, or to create new entrepreneurs and to work from which to create a future for themselves. Approximately 30% of those migrants are currently living in Colombia, and we estimate that there are near 1.8 million people, close to 2 million Venezuelans residing in our country. As such, Colombia is hosting the second largest migrant and refugee population after Turkey. As we celebrate the bicentennial of our independence in year 2019, we cannot forget that both our countries were born together, sharing the same values, the same hopes for freedom, prosperity, justice, and peace. And Colombia and Venezuela are different sides but the same coin, both sides of the same coin. As such, Colombia has understood that migration must involve integration. We have adopted a three-step policy consisting of welcoming migrants, integrating them, and of course, growing together. We are currently undergoing the integration phase, and our policy has been recognized by the whole world as, of course, as an example of developing country being host to such a large number of migrants. 2 million of Venezuelans in Colombia means 4% of our entire population. Integration is represented by not having just an immigration policy, but rather including aspects of migration in all governmental policies. As such, the central bank has estimated migration could represent a 1% increase in Colombia's productivity in the future, but now it only represents, it means a large amount of money that we need to spend in education, health, different facilities for Venezuelan migrants in the current situation. Amongst the greatest challenges of integration is being able to provide rights, services, and of course protection to the migrant population. To ensure this, our government has enacted ambitious regulation, such as the Migrant Protection Statute, in order to provide 1 million migrants with temporary legal status in Colombia. Moreover, together with the international community, Colombia has made an effort to provide migrants with access to health, education, family care, and work. But let me say frankly. Now, almost 80% of the costs for those migrants were supported with the Colombian budget. The international support, the international cooperation to those Venezuelan migrants has not been enough to cover all their necessities. Since 2015, Colombia has provided 3,661,000 health procedures to migrants, distributed 19 million different medicines, and 2,200,000 vaccinations. Furthermore, we have provided 450,000 migrant children with free primary and secondary education, regardless of the migrant status, with a cost of over 160 million US dollars. We have also strived to provide child protection services to over 297,000 migrant children and issued over 12,900 work permits for adult people. But the efforts of Colombia as a host country have added a significant pressure to the country's public services network. The debt owed to public hospitals has increased by $126 million, expenditure in water sanitation that has increased also by $270 million, and of course the programs to promote access to work have cost us around $360 million US dollars, among others. In total, the added cost for public finances is estimated in around 1.2 billion US dollars, which is a large amount of money for the Colombian budget. The response of Colombia has been possible thanks to the support and solidarity coming from the central and regional governments, the international community, as I mentioned, but this amount of money has been possible also thanks to the Colombian private sector, to the Colombian citizens, because the solidarity in Colombia has been very big with the Venezuelan brothers and sisters. Nevertheless, we must not forget this is a complex issue that requires high-scale coordination in order to overcome the challenges that persist. 32% of Venezuelan migrants in Colombia still lack proper access to housing, the provision of which is estimated to $260 million by the World Bank. Monetary poverty in Colombia has increased in 1.6% as a result of Venezuelan migration. Multidimensional poverty measurements have shown 238,000 migrant households in Colombia are currently in poverty, and especially we have the urgent need to integrate 1.8 million migrants to our labor market under decent working conditions. As such, the role of international community has been crucial, as I have to recognize, but there is not enough. There is still much more to do to ensure successful integration. 422 million US dollars have already been mobilized to help Colombia adequately to welcome those migrants, out of which 50% has been directed toward the humanitarian response. Unfortunately, xenophobia has been rising in Colombia, and independent polls have suggested us that there is growing an anti-migrant sentiment during the last months in Colombia. First of all, maybe because of the COVID pandemic that makes everybody feel very nervous, very uncertain about the future. At the beginning, we have no vaccines. Now we start the process of vaccination, but we feel that poor communities, they don't want to have Venezuelans sharing with them this vaccination now when we have not enough for the entire Colombian population. But the other problem is regarding security. Unfortunately, there is a very clear growth in the different delinquency, in different crimes and so many of them are being attributed to the Venezuelan population. So that's why we feel that those concerns regarding the additional challenges brought to Colombia because of Venezuelan population is something that we have to control. And that's why we need to increase the cooperation of international community and of course the effectiveness of our country in order to create more and more stable jobs for Colombians and for Venezuelans who live in the borderline between the two countries. In order to prevent this and xenophobia against Venezuela, this further action is needed by the international community under the principle of common responsibility. Moreover, freedom and democracy must be reinstalled in Venezuela under a principle of of humanity, of human rights, of human dignity, of respect of human rights. We know that there are a lot of crimes against humanity in Venezuela. The report made by Michelle Bachelet 7 months ago for the United Nations, it was so clear about those violations of human rights. Colombia's welcoming stance, its effort, sacrifice, and commitment to integration will endure, but justice and history cannot tolerate the endurance of the gross human rights violation, the mismanagement, and the failure of the Venezuelan regime to provide basic rights to its citizens. But it's not a failure. This is a situation that the regime has created for citizens in Venezuela. We feel that this is something that they are doing deliberately because it's impossible to understand how a country that still has not oil, but they have a lot of gold, mining, different national resources that they are exploiting. But where is that money? How are they using that money? And of course, we know that nowadays in Venezuela, it's all this very good environment for narcotics and terrorist groups for different parts of the world. So that's why we know that that's not a simple failure. This is a situation that they have created to pressure the Venezuelan population, to make them feel that there is no hope to look for democracy, and that's why the Venezuelan population is not protesting, is not allowing, it's not doing what they used to do 2, 3, 5, 6 years ago in order to ask for peace, ask for freedom, and ask for democracy. We sincerely hope the world will maintain and strengthen its support to Colombia in integrating migrants and sincerely hope this webinar will contribute to raise awareness of the sacrifices which go with being a host nation. We know the entire world is having a lot of trouble, a lot of problems because of the pandemic, but we have to be clear that the migrant situation coming from Venezuela and is split in different countries in the world, this is a very against human dignity. Families are divided. People is suffering because of hunger, war when they are in Venezuela, and they are suffering also because of hunger when they are in different countries. We have to ask for Venezuelan democracy, and we have to help countries like Colombia, but mostly Colombia, who has now almost 40% of the Venezuelan migrants in the entire world. Colombia is not a rich country. We are a very solid country with our brother and sister because we know Venezuela and Colombia are both members of the same family, the family of freedom, the family of democracy, but we need to have this conscience in the international community about the Venezuelan crisis, the lack of freedom, the lack of human rights, respect, the lack of institutions, the lack of jobs, the lack of food, the lack of everything in Venezuela. So hopefully this webinar will create some more conscience and some more action in order to help us in Colombia and in order to help Venezuelans directly here in Colombia. Thank you very much for this invitation.